Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us for another Evernym webinar, SSI focused webinar as usual. And hello there to David Lee as well. Thanks for the greetings, David. Yeah, thanks for joining us for this one. Cracking stuff. What we're going to be talking about today is really quite significant for us at Evernym, and we hope for everybody else in the sovereign identity industry. Today we're going to be focusing on open source and why we've made a big decision to open up our previously proprietary software and what it means for you as well. I'm joined today by a couple of esteemed colleagues, and let's just flick on to that next one, please, Alex. A couple of esteemed colleagues, Richard Esplin and James Monaghan. So just before we start, my name is Andy Tobin. I look after Evernym's business in Europe. I've been with the company for nearly 5 years now, which is amazing. It's a lifetime in the world of self-sovereign identity. Richard, just hand over to you. Do you want to just let us know a bit of history about yourself? And then we'll go to James.
Yeah, I'm Richard Esplin, Director of Product at Evernym. I've spent a lot of time working with our upstream open source communities at Hyperledger and Sovereign and Trust Over IP. And I also work a lot with driving best practices across our various projects and products.
Cool, thank you, Richard. And Richard is going to be handling the majority of the presentation today. We're also joined by James Monaghan. James, just want to do a quick intro?
Yeah, happy to. Hi, everybody. I'm James Monaghan, and I'm the head of product here at Evernym. As Andy was about to say, I'm here mostly to join in the Q&A. Richard's going to do all the fun stuff in the presentation. But my role at Evernym is really to sort of oversee what is our answer to the market need, and that involves exactly this subject, the balancing act between our involvement in communities and our investment in commercial products, and the role of open source in that is very key to what we're doing. So I hope you enjoy the discussion today, and I'm looking forward to the questions afterwards.
Cool, thank you, James. All right, so the agenda today is a packed agenda. Richard's going to run the show on the presentation side of things, as I said. We're going to be talking really about open source culture and what it means, and what some of the decisions we've recently made mean for you and for our products, and how people like yourselves can actually use them. We're going to give you a bit of a guide as to how to get started with open source and sovereign identity as well. As per usual, we've got a Q&A session afterwards. And if you just go to the next slide there, Richard. What we found on these webinars is that there's loads and loads of questions, which is just fantastic. And we decided to try something a bit different. So it's the first time we've done this. We haven't done it before. We're going to do a green room style thing where we're trying to encourage some of that kind of face-to-face type of ad hoc business interaction we got pre-COVID that I think we're all missing quite a bit. So we're going to try something a bit more interactive rather than a Q&A where nobody can speak and we kind of manage the whole thing really closely. We're going to do a green room. So you'll be able to share audio and video and chat and so on. So what you'll see at the end, we'll give you a link to a separate Zoom, which is not like the webinar Zoom like this one where it's very tightly controlled. It's just a normal Zoom room. So please dive into that. We'll give you the link a bit later on. And we'll see how that goes. We may only try it once, or we may be doing it every time. We'll see. So that's the green room later. Just a quick promo for the next webinar we've got coming up. If you're joining us for the first time, all of our previous webinars are at evernym.com/webinars. The last one we did was on the future of digital wallets, which was really interesting. And if you're new to self-sovereign identity, we have a bunch of really good introductory webinars there as well, with some really good guests speaking. In a couple of weeks' time, we're going to be covering everything on the product side of things. So we're going to be going in particular into Connect Me, which is our iOS and Android digital wallet app. And that is built with our mobile SDK, which is something that you can use if you want to build your own app that has all of the capabilities of a digital credential wallet. We'll also be giving you a bit of a sneak peek at the roadmap in 2021, what that's looking like. And as well as that, we've got a new release of Connect Me coming out shortly in the next few days. So by the time this webinar happens, that should be out. So we'll take you through that as well. So that's next Tuesday, December 1st, 8 a.m. Pacific time. So same time as this one. So block that out. Okay, without further ado, let's press on. So, before we kick into the main thing, as per other webinars that we do, please use the Zoom Q&A function to put questions in. The chat, they tend to get a bit lost, so use the Q&A. Alex is behind the scenes gathering all the questions up and putting them in a Google Doc that we will look at. So when we get to the Q&A section, we'll go through as many of those as we can do. So use the Zoom Q&A and note the webinar has been recorded, and it will go up on evernym.com/webinars shortly after this, so normally a day or two. So without further ado, Richard, I'm going to hand over to you. The floor is yours. Fire away.
Thank you, Andy. We're going to talk today about open source, as Andy explained, and it's important to recognize that open source is about more than a specific set of technology licenses. It's really a culture, and it's a way of collaboratively working together and innovating that long predates software. It goes back to the dawn of time, whenever people work together in the open, transparently across their various needs to get something done. That's really the ethos of open source culture. But the first person to apply a name to this concept in terms of software was Richard Stallman. And in the late 1970s, he coined the term free software, and he was trying to draw a distinction with proprietary software to say that proprietary software forces you to, it segments society, it forces you to, it controls its users, and it prevents you from doing good things like collaborating and sharing. And free software is about freedom. He'd say free as in speech. That the freedom that's involved in free software extends to the users and allows them to collaborate and participate. And this is good for society. It's a moral duty in Richard Stallman's formulation, that it's important to share what you receive and to collaborate together. And as he was, in order to make this happen, he created what's called copyleft, which is to take copyright, the law that prevents you from duplicating software, and to put a term in the license that requires resharing. So anything that you using this license called the GNU public license, and you can see their logo of a GNU, and say anything that you're receiving from me for free is free software, you then have the legal and moral obligation to share your improvements and to share anything that it helped you do with the world under the same license, so to make it also free software. Now, people really like this. It did a great job in the 1980s at driving, and even up till today, of driving a lot of innovation, a lot of collaboration. But there were people who struggled in a business context with the ethical formulation of free software, and the whole term free software is confusing. It makes it sound like you can't have a business. And Richard Stallman would say, no, it's not free as in price, it's free as in freedom. But this confusion did persist. So in the mid 80s, people started saying, well, let's use the Latin term libri for freedom. Maybe that'll be clearer, but it wasn't. And in the 90s, a subset of this group, of this ecosystem, got together and said, let's pick a new term. Let's use the term open source and emphasize that the source code is available. And the biggest open source project in the early 90s was, or the patron saint, if you will, of open source was Linus Torvalds, the creator of Linux. And Linux uses one of these free software licenses. It's requires share alike. But Linus Torvalds, he wasn't worried about it from a moral standpoint. He wasn't worried about ethical duties and things like that. He always emphasized it's about having fun as an engineer. The open is better engineering. And if we're all working together, then all the problems are easier. That is, we each try to scratch our own itch and do the thing that's best for our organization, but doing it in a collaborative way, then everybody benefits. We don't have to do the same. We don't have to resolve the same problems, and we have more fun. And these two different formulations of open source software, of free, libre, and open source software, really highlight the two important benefits that come from open source development. That there's a freedom that's good for society, good for democracy, good for users. And there's also innovation that comes from collaborating together and having fun as an engineer and interacting with people on an individual basis across organizations. And both of those together are the culture that drives open source. And it's gone far beyond software. This open culture movement, we see here the picture of a 3D printer. You can design physical objects. You print them out on your 3D printer or CNC milling or whatever machine you want to use to build it. But you can upload the plans under one of these licenses, and other people collaborate and participate and improve it, and everybody benefits. The Creative Commons organization is a set of licenses and a nonprofit that fosters this. The goal is to make art and media and all sorts of digital assets easy to share and easy to reuse under standard licensing. And so it's gone far beyond software there. Of course, this concept that the laws should be available, legal commentary should be available for a democracy to function, all that should be accessible by citizens. And in the scientific area, that in order to allow reproduction of results and auditing of scientific findings and further innovations, the data should be available, and the software that drives that data, and even the scientific hardware should all be available in order to move the scientific enterprise forward. And it's even gotten to the wet sciences, is people share bits of DNA and RNA sequencing for good and bad. There are a lot of interesting implications of that. Of the biohacking movement. So you can see this culture is far beyond software, but the ethos is the same. The ethos is about collaboration, openness, innovating quicker, providing rights to the users and citizenry in democratic movements that's good for the economy and the ecosystem as a whole. At Evernym, as we've talked about how do we develop in the open, we focused on a few key attributes of our engineering, that we need to be more focused on community, the transparent communications critical here, that we're not only worried about making our products easy to adopt, but they need to be easier to contribute to. And of course, there's infrastructure to do this. The source code, the architecture, the documentation, the tooling, the roadmaps, they all need to be inspectable and open and ready for people to collaborate. Now, I do want to make really clear, open development does not mean everything is public. Customer data remains private. There's information that our customers don't want to share, and that's fine. They trust us not to share that. So we do protect customer data, even as we work to make sure our engineering process is more open. There's an open source consortium in Silicon Valley called the To-Do Group. And in the early days, they put together this code of conduct I really liked that I think captures this ethos of open development. That we need to be friendly and patient and welcoming and considerate and respectful. We need to be careful in how we communicate. And when we're collaborating, there's always misunderstandings. When you have lots of stakeholders, there's competing interests, and we need to understand why we disagree with each other so that we can find collaborative solutions. And that captures well the goals of open development. So Richard Stallman created the free software movement, founded the Free Software Foundation. He tried to formulate 4 freedoms that are necessary to protect this culture and this ethos of open development. And the first is you need to be able to run the program for any purpose. The developer of the program can't discriminate based on their ethical framework. Some developers want to say this can't be used for maybe military applications. And if the developer is putting restrictions around how it gets used, then it doesn't respect freedom, the first freedom. He counts like a programmer, so he starts from 0, freedom 0. And of course, you can't discriminate based on the business model of the developer either. Sometimes these developers want to say, well, you can use it for any purpose that doesn't compete with me, or that you can't host a SaaS service. And those would not fit as free software because they don't respect freedom 0. The next freedom is to study how the program works. That is we be able to look under the hood and be able to do performance testing, security audits, reverse engineer and decompile. That's really important to be able to feel ownership of this, to be able to understand what network communication is happening under the hood, what privacy, how privacy is being preserved, what security assumptions are being made. And of course, the next freedom is the ability to redistribute, independent of the developer. that you can create your own community of users of this product and work with each other and ensure that people are successful. And the fourth is the ability to improve the program and redistribute those improvements. And that's what allows you to maintain the program beyond the lifetime of the original developer. Now, these four freedoms of free software, they were adopted by the open source movement. The open source movement created a nonprofit called the Open Source Initiative. They have a different formulation. It's a bit more complicated, but it's about these same freedoms. And that's a trademark term. So if a license is open source, if it's approved by the Free Software Foundation and by the Open Source Initiative, then you know it gives you these freedoms and all the implications that has. You'll see that those freedoms really support the ideas of the self-sovereign identity movement. The mission of self-sovereign identity is about individuals being in control of their identities and being able to have those four freedoms of controlling the software, being able to inspect it, use it for any purpose, redistribute it, improve it, and redistribute those improvements. Those support the ideas of decentralized identity, of user control, user rights, making sure the information is transportable, and that it's long-lived and widely adopted. They correspond very closely. And open source software goes a long way to helping achieve self-sovereign identity. Now, I've discussed this at length in other webinars, so this was just touching the surface. In October, November of 2018, I gave a presentation at the SSI meetup at ssimeetup.org on self-sovereign identity and open source, go in quite a bit more detail there. And in March of this year, we post on our YouTube channel a 1-hour conversation about open source product strategy. And so that's, if you're interested in more details about some of these concepts, you can check out those 2 webinars. So let's talk about how you can get the benefits of open source software in your organization and what those benefits can imply. First, want to recognize that when Evernym works with you, we're talking about a lot of different use. In open development, we're worried about building communities, and we have a lot of communities. We have our upstream open source communities we contribute to. We have our Verity users, our product users of the Verity and the mobile SDK and our mobile wallets. Not all users are customers. the organizations we work with, of course, a critical community. A lot of you on this webinar, we appreciate your business. And of course, people that want to contribute to our software, we want to make sure that they have their needs met. And implementation partners, like a lot of you on the webinar, these are the primary communities that we worry about every day when we're at work. But there's a set of secondary communities as well that we don't interact with as often, but they're still really important for our business and for the ecosystem we're building. There's the wider self-sovereign identity groups of the Decentralized Identity Foundation, the Internet Identity Workshop, Rebooting Web of Trust, and other SSI ecosystems. There's the various standards bodies we work with. We spend most of our time with the World Wide Web Consortium on the DIF working group and the DID working group and the Verifiable Credentials working group. SSI is a big deal for governments now, is they realize the benefits they can give their citizenry. A lot of nonprofits recognize the importance of self-sovereign identity solutions for their key their users and stakeholders. And of course, because we at the foundation of our self-sovereign identity solution is a decentralized ledger, we have a lot of technology overlap with cryptocurrency and blockchain communities. So we end up collaborating quite a bit with those groups. So across these different communities, we want to make sure that we can provide certain guarantees, and the open source license in and of itself provides specific guarantees. Because you have control of the software, you have a certain amount of vendor independence, and you can self-support if you need to, which reduces some risk of your vendor having diverging interests from you. Because not as much of the value is tied into the intellectual property, that puts you in a better negotiating position. A lot of organizations recognize the benefits that open source provides, and so they have policy around open source adoption. So that license gives you that compliance. And of course, there's an ancillary social benefit. It's really great to know that our software is getting used by people that we didn't expect. that we might not have a commercial relationship with, but they're doing good things in the world, and that anybody can inspect the software and can learn from it and benefit from examining it. Now, there are other things that open source is likely to give you, depending on exactly how it's built into the business. Most open source companies have to focus on support because the intellectual property isn't as tightly controlled, and that support focus is a good driver of behavior in an organization. Of course, you can adopt without a relationship with the vendor, which can allow faster timelines. Improved security comes from people being able to inspect the source code and then contribute improvements and get those tied in. Those third-party contributions can lead to faster innovation. Most open source organizations are more transparent, which makes it easier to work with them. And of course, because anybody can look under the hood and figure out what's going on, they can also interoperate with it. So that's a nice ancillary benefit as well. But the benefits aren't just for the organizations, the customers that are adopting. Because it's an open source solution, the users also get benefits from this license. They can feel increased control over their technology. They can investigate and experiment and look under the hood and make sure that their privacy is being respected, or pay a third party to do that audit for them. Same with security, being able to verify that security assumptions are being met. That SSI best practices get adopted quicker when the source code's available and people can examine it. And there's more interoperability and data portability because people can examine and look and figure out how do I get my information out of this system and convert it to another format, and how do I work with this code base. But in order to receive these benefits, there's some impactful decisions that have to be made. And when you're adopting an open source solution, you want to look and say, and understand how these three decisions are made, so that you can see what the implications are for the way that open source will work in the project. Of course, the license is the ground rules. We're going to talk about that. Then you have to worry about the governance model. And finally, you want to talk about what standards are involved in the project. So the license lays the foundation for collaboration. And Bruce Perrins, he was the first president of the Open Source Initiative. He formulated this idea that there's three categories of open source licenses. There's gift licenses, like the Apache license that we use quite a bit. It pretty much says, do what you want, just don't sue us. If you're using this without a commercial relationship, we don't care what you do, but there's no commercial relationship. You don't have any expectations or warranties from us. Second is the sharing with rules license. Those are the ones that Richard Stallman innovated with. They, like the GNU public license, they say, if I share with you, you have an obligation to share what I gave you, and any improvements that you make or any benefits that you get from that, you have to share with the world. Derivative works is the legal term. And then the third category is an in-between license, where it says you do have to share, but you only have to share the changes you actually make to what we gave you, not all the downstream stuff. But there's also a class of source available licenses, which aren't exactly open source. They don't preserve all four of the freedoms, and they're not approved by the Open Source Initiative, but they are source available licenses, and they attempt to find a compromise between the benefits of open source, but also the commercial needs of a business. And we'll talk more about time-based licenses like the business source license. We make use of that license now. But there's also these all rights reserved except, all rights are granted except licenses. So Confluent with the Confluent community license and the server side public license from Mongo, they both say, hey, look, you can treat it just like open source, but you can't compete with us, or you can't host a competitive SaaS or you can't host a SaaS service. So it's most the rights of open source, but not all. And then there are organizations who they recognize the benefits of the open source license, but they also want to say, hey, here's one or two features that we are reserving as commercial. We'll give you the source code too, so we'll distribute it along with the open source stuff, but it's proprietary, so you do have to have a license in order to do certain things. And so Elastic has been doing that recently to help them build a business that they can use to drive innovation. So with this set of licenses, they fall on a spectrum, and you have the pure play model, which Red Hat shows can work very well, where everything is open source. But the challenge is that you have to have a tangential way of getting revenue. Support, hosting, training has to be some reason for people to pay you, or you don't have any money to invest in the ecosystem. And it can be very hard to carve out that business, and it can be very hard to scale it. And on the other side, you have these source available licenses where they're very commercial. They're designed to protect a commercial model, but the development's in the public and the source is available. And then there's organizations that do an open core model. And the idea is that most of the software is open, but there are some parts you keep closed. And the trick is picking which of those parts you're going to keep closed in a way that does give customers an incentive to pay you so that you have a business, but doesn't undermine the benefits of open source to the point that there's no community. You got to have enough in the open that there's value there, or there's no. You might as well just take a purely proprietary model. So that open core is a challenging model because you have to pick those features very carefully in order to build a sustainable open source ecosystem and a sustainable business. And it's hard to communicate that. Hard to communicate where that line is. Next is the governance model. Again, we see the spectrum between vendor-controlled open source projects where the focus is on the customer. They can be very tailored to the customer needs, but there is a single vendor that you're working with. And on the other side, of course, is most of GitHub. Hey, we found this code. Let's use it. It's open source licensed, but there's no community. And if anything goes wrong, you got to figure out how to deal with that. And most of us have taken code like that out of npm or some other open source repo. But you got to remember that you don't have any sort of relationship with anybody, and if anything goes wrong, you're on the hook. You got to figure out how to deal with that. And in between those two are these formal communities, these consortiums. And of course, we work a lot with Hyperledger. Other ones are Apache and Debian. There are a lot of these now, where there's multiple vendors. They're all working together. And these make for really healthy projects because there's no individual vendor that you're locked into, but they can be fairly hard to influence because there are a lot of stakeholders. And so looking a little closer at community governance, corporate governance, these multiple copyright holder, anybody can merge community consensus process ecosystems, they're really good for adoption. They're really good for long-lived projects. We really enjoy working with Hyperledger and Sovereign Trusted IP on these kind of projects. But you have to recognize there are a lot of stakeholders. It can be hard to find alignment. It's hard to move quickly. And it can be really hard to get polish. People frequently want to skip on documentation, on tests, on the CI/CD infrastructure. A lot of these projects, we struggle to make sure that these pieces of the project are healthy. Whereas when a corporation's in control of the project, they're very focused. There's a single copyright holder. All other contributors need to sign a license agreement. Only the copyright holder can control who merges. There's a single unified vision, and it's tailored on the customer needs. You want something this quarter, you're our customer, we'll get it done this quarter. Now, we do focus on the customer needs. So that means there's a narrower set of use cases than you're going to get in a consortium. People are only contributing in order to advance those use cases. And as long as you're aligned with the corporation, the company that controls that code base, things are great. But if you disagree, you do need to spread out a bit, or you need to recognize that when you disagree, you got to fork and run it yourself. Now, that's great because it's open source. You have that right. You're not locked into that vendor. But that is something that you need to recognize depending on how the project evolves over time. Now, the third key decision here, impactful decision, is what standards are supported. If your open source code base doesn't support common standards, then you're still not working with the rest of the ecosystem. Your data isn't portable, or at least not easily portable. And in self-sovereign identity, we talk about 3 standards that are really important. The DID spec, we work on that working group, help chair that. The verifiable credentials spec at the W3C. And of course, all the agent-to-agent DID communications that you see at the DIFCOM or DIDCOM at the Decentralized Identity Foundation and the Aries project at Hyperledger. And of course, Trust over IP, they recently announced an attempt to take an Indy Aries set of technologies and build that out as an interoperability profile that other people can target. We participate on all this. So our products, one of the things we do for our customers is we simplify these kind of compliance efforts. But when you're looking at open source code bases, you want to make sure that the standards that matter to your organization are in fact supported. So those are key criteria to pay attention to get the maximum benefit from an open source project. And now let's talk about how Evernym provides those benefits to our customers. When we were looking at how we want to run our business, we sat down, we're product people, right? What are our goals here? Let's make our list of licensing goals. We want to grow the ecosystem. We want to drive adoption best practices. We want to be able to take other open source projects and bring them into our code base and have those people feel good about that, the upstream contributors. We want to be able to encourage third parties to contribute to our code bases. And of course, if it's free to adopt, then people are more likely to talk about it and share it with others. That community marketing and the ethos of being an open source company gives us a good brand recognition. We believe that giving these rights to our customers will help our customers feel more goodwill towards us. And it's always nice to be the good guys. We want to be the good guys and work with people that enjoy working with us. But we also need to build a business that allows us to invest in this open source ecosystem. And so we need an on-ramp to paid offerings, and we need to be able to scale. We're not doing incremental innovation here. SSI is a totally new platform that requires cryptography on up to web applications. And it takes real investment to be able to make that successful. So we need to make sure that the business addresses that appropriately. The business model does. So that's our product value. We want to unite this open ecosystem of value that people get from all these upstream projects, Hyperledger and Sovereign and Trust over IP, the community governed vendor independent tools and open networks and interoperable networks. We want to unite that with a focus on the customer, that we adopt these solutions we add advanced capabilities and we provide support as the world's experts in SSI. And that's the value we want our customers to feel like they're getting every time they interact with us. To give that value, we're making some commitments, and we're really excited about this. We put a blog post up recently about it, that we're going to keep our customers free from lock-in. Our goal is not to tie people in without options. We're going to support open protocols and interoperability. And this is a big commitment. We're going to release our source code for all of our products. When they're generally available, that source code will be put under a binding commitment that within 3 years, it will be under a permissive open source license. And that's what the business source license does, is it provides that time-based guarantee. Now, there's some exceptions. If we're working on code that doesn't give benefits of open source, then we might not put that under these kind of licenses. If we're doing integration to a proprietary product, well, you're not getting the open source benefit from the proprietary product, so we might not put that under this kind of license. Our infrastructure code, if it's very tied to the way we do our hosting, then it's not really going to benefit people, and there can be security implications. So we're not necessarily going to pull all that out into a public repo. Similarly, our commercial products, we need to track licensing and things like that. That code will keep private. And as we maintain really old code bases for customers, we might not keep all of those repos public, mostly for convenience and other things. People can always backport fixes if they choose to, but once it stops being part of the general product and part of the older legacy code bases under specific customer agreements, we might not keep that public. But everything else, all of our main products, Verity, the mobile SDK, Connect.me, future stuff we're building, we're going to put it under these source available licenses with the binding commitment to make it permissively licensed. Now, we also are going to work as an open development team. We're pretty good at this. We've done it for a couple of years, but we can get better. And that means collaborating with the community on foundational technologies. We're going to continue to invest at Hyperledger and these upstream projects. Being transparent, just like we're doing today, we're making this commitment. We're going to be transparent about our policies and our practices. We recognize things change as businesses change. We need to be transparent as we make those decisions and discuss them with people. And we'll follow open development principles. We need to get more of our we're making our source code public. We need to get more of our CI/CD public, our issue tracking documentation, all these kind of things we need to make public, where we can engage with our users, customers, partners, and other contributors. Now, of course, there's some exceptions. Like I mentioned, proprietary integrations, customer data, I mentioned that's going to be private. Niche use cases, if we're only doing it for a subset of the customer base, it might not make as much sense. And of course, any kind of security fix, we need to keep private till it's been deployed at our customers. But beyond those limited exceptions, we're going to be really transparent. We have been transparent. We're going to continue and double down on that. Now, licensing is how you get this done. It lays the rules of the game. So the Apache license we're going to continue to use. Like I mentioned, it's a gift style license. It says you can do whatever you want. Just go ahead and do it. So this is really good for when we want broad adoption. So anything we contribute to Hyperledger at Indy and Aries and Ursa and anything is sovereign and trusted IP, that's all Apache license because that's all that those organizations deal with. But also the Verity SDK, we want you to be comfortable putting that into whatever code base you want. So it's Apache license. Now, it is an Evernym project. It's not a consortium project. We govern the roadmap there, but it'll be Apache licensed. And we expect there's going to be other projects like this, where it's tooling and SDKs and compatibility layers. Some of these things we're likely to use the Apache license. Then the business source license, as I mentioned, we have the blog post on the right. You can see that at evernym.com in the blog section. The business source license, it was created by the MariaDB team. And it's a way to say, hey, look, this software is almost open source. The source code's available. You can use it for any non-production reason for free without any sort of commercial agreement. But if you want to use it commercially, there's some limitations. But after a period of time, it becomes completely open source under the following license. And so I want to emphasize the business source license does not replace our commercial agreements. If we have a commercial agreement with you, that governs your usage of the software. You can do whatever you want. None of these limitations apply. But if somebody goes to Evernym's GitHub organization and wants to use that code without a relationship with us, they have the right to do that based on the business source license, but they have to follow the restrictions we put there. So the restrictions we have, there's two restrictions. The first is no production use beyond 500 monthly active users. So if you're using this for a public use case, that's fine, as long as it's limited in size of how many people are engaged in a specific month. Or if you're using it for internal purposes, that's fine too, for reasonably sized organizations. The second is you can't provide commercial services to third parties. So you can't use it to run a SaaS service, and you can't sell credentials. You can give credentials away up to the 500 monthly active users, but you can't sell them. If you want to have a larger use case or sell credentials or host a service based on this, you really should discuss a commercial agreement with us. But after 36 months, the code base converts to being under the Apache license. So every day we push our code to GitHub, and that code 3 years later is available with no strings attached. That's pretty exciting. This value accumulates every single day. Every day when we push our code, that clock starts for that commit. Now, as a customer, you get access to the latest stuff without any sort of restrictions. We'll figure out a commercial agreement that works for you. But if any time you want to switch that open source code base, that's fine. We're sorry. We hope you come back and be our customer in the future. But that's your choice because we've made this commitment. So let's be really clear about this per product. We select our license and we select our governance model. The Verity is the business source license, so it has those restrictions, or you can have a commercial agreement, and it's an Evernym project. Whereas the SDK is an Apache license. You can do whatever you want, or you can have a commercial license. We support that. And of course, we control that project. Connect.me, mobile SDK, the Evernym libvcx fork that was part of the Verity 1 code base. Those are all going to be released as Evernym business source or commercially licensed product under Evernym's control. But the work we do upstream at Indy, Aries, Ursa, that continues to be Apache licensed. And of course, that's a community control project where we collaborate with the community there on the roadmap and what we contribute. So this is a journey. We've got some important things done. It was a thrilling day for me when we put the Verity source code on GitHub. that represents millions of dollars, 5 years of development and millions of dollars of investment. It's a polished SSI product. We consider it the most advanced SSI product in the world. And you can see under the hood, all the details. Just go to GitHub, it's all there. Verity SDK is also there. The MySQL storage plugin that we use in Verity and in Verity 1, in the Verity 2 code base and in the Evernym libvcx Verity 1 code base, that's all there as well. Now, we're working on the mobile SDK. We're getting close to being able to put that code up. We're working on connect.me. We released a version of that a couple years ago to Sovereign. We're going to release the current code base, but we want to integrate it into our development process so the new code goes up every day. And we still need to get the Evernym libvcx fork through. So that's where we're at in this process right now. And then, or simultaneously, we need to improve the contribution process. Today, you can go on GitHub. It's really meant to be a read-only mirror. Our internal development is somewhere else in a private GitLab. We need to make those repos easier to understand. We need to improve how artifacts are distributed so you can build them into your pipelines easier. You're going to see that fairly soon. Then we can figure out how to get the CI/CD public so people can see their tests. We need to make it easier to accept a contributor license agreement. Currently, it's a PDF. You have to email us. It's kind of messy. And then we can have a public pull request process. We're also figuring out how to keep customer data separate from our engineering processes so we can open up our issue tracker. So expect to see that. That's going to take a while, but that's the roadmap of where we're headed with this effort. I want to recognize that part of the reason we're able to do this now is because we got accepted into the ESSIF Accelerator Program. It's a European Union project, and they're helping fund the effort of opening up the source code and improving our contribution process. So we want to recognize that their generous support, and we really appreciate collaborating with them. It's been fun to be part of that accelerator and work with the other members of that accelerator community. So let's talk about how you can get started. Before you get started, there's a decision to make. Just one. It's an important decision though. You can go to the public repos and get started on the open source code base, or you can go to evernym.com and start using Verity as a SaaS product. The Verity Sandbox is free to sign up to, and you can get in there and play with it. And they're not exclusive. You can do both. I think both is great, but they're two different paths for interacting. If you use the open source code base, recognize you're self-supported. If you don't have a commercial agreement with us, then you're on your own for finding answers. But and you have to figure out your own. You need to figure out your own hosting. But it's really good to be able to look in the internals, figure out how things work, validate your assumptions, see what's happening under the hood. Now, in the Verity Sandbox and using SaaS Verity, we're supporting you. We have an agreement. We'll answer your questions. We've got a process for doing that really effectively. We host everything. You don't have any setup. You can start looking at the code base right now, and after lunch, have a demo for your team. It's a really great way to get work done. And you can do both. It's not one or the other. Both is often the most productive approach, but and both are available to you. So we encourage you to check out the documentation. At evernym.com developers, we have lots of good information there for you to get started for your technical team to get started. The Verity Sandbox, I already mentioned, it's free, it's available, you can get signed up really quickly. Then you can go to Evernym, you can go to github.com/Evernym in our Evernym org and see the source code for Verity and for the Verity SDK and the other stuff we have there. Soon you'll be able to see the mobile SDK and connect.me. And of course, if you want to send a PR, fantastic. It's a little cumbersome right now. I'll send you a PDF and ask you to sign and send it back. But we'd really appreciate any sort of contribution you want to make, help polish the product for your usage and benefits everybody else as well. So we can't wait to see what you're going to build. Look forward to collaborating with you as we develop SSI solutions of the future together. So thank you.
Hey, Richard, that was awesome. I think everyone will agree with me that you win the prize for the most enthusiastic webinar presentation and most content-filled that I think we've ever had. So that was just phenomenal.
Well, I can say it's the most enthusiastic for a discussion of software licensing. Super cool.
Yeah, that's excellent. And your enthusiasm really comes through, which is phenomenal. So thanks very much for that. Yeah, I think at Evernym, really, we've had a a long history, well, long in blockchain terms, right? Long in SSI terms, history of open sourcing things, starting with the first decision to open up what became Hyperledger Indy and all of that code. And at the time, I was one of the ones thinking, well, we're just going to give all this stuff away that we spent so much time and effort doing. But what a great decision it was, because it's just triggered this whole momentum and community we're seeing behind SSI, which is just growing phenomenally. And this is the same sort of thing, and I think you described it really well. So thanks very much for doing that. Questions in the Zoom Q&A, please drop them in there. In time-honored fashion. Oh, okay. Yeah, well, actually, you got some thanks coming in there, Richard, from Timothy and, oh, I just missed the other one, and Rama. So thanks for the thanks as well. Really enjoy those. So yeah, in time-honored fashion, here's a couple that we prepared earlier. As you get other ones, just shouting. Okay, so any other questions, drop them in the Q&A, please, and we'll tackle as many of those as we can. Oh, David, that's a nice one. I like it. But let's kick off first with this one. So I think Richard went through the permitted use really pretty quickly. So James, can you just handle what exactly is permitted and excluded by this license approach? Just want to cover that off for us again quickly.
Yeah, happy to. So for anything that's under the business source license, so within the first 36 months of being released, you're free to tinker around with it for anything you like in a non-production context, right? We want people kicking the tires, learning how it works, building internal prototypes and all that kind of stuff. We don't want any barriers whatsoever to sort of getting your first Hello World demo up there and being able to show your stakeholders and things like that. Also, limited production use. So if you're inside your organization, if you've got what we would consider a small use case, so less than 300 active users, then fill your boots. You can go ahead, run that in production yourself, obviously on your own infrastructure, and issue credentials, verify proofs, all that good stuff. And also for outside your organization, if you can run services for third parties, as long as they're non-commercial. So you're not charging any money or otherwise deriving commercial benefit from offering that service. And again, that same usage restriction applies. So it's got to be a modest size deployment, less than 500 active users. And so what we think that means is most people who are getting started building their first use case, and most small deployments, be they in academia or small and medium-sized businesses, 500 active users or less, they should be able to have broad success using the software. What is excluded, and where we would prefer folks engage commercially with Evernym, is deployments larger than that. So production use, inside your organization for more than 500 active users. Anything where you are monetizing this service directly, so charging for the credentials or charging for the service that makes the credentials available. We think it's fair that if you're getting paid, then we get paid something, and we can help grow this industry together. And then finally, yes, if you're sort of repackaging the software and making it available as a service for third parties, again, that would fall under the commercial activities exclusion. So we would want you to engage commercially with us. But that's where we've drawn the line. And as a reminder, that only applies for the first 36 months after an individual piece of code has been committed. Anything that is 3 years or more old, you can do whatever the Apache 2 license permits you to, which is almost anything. And so that's, yeah, I hope that was what you're after there, Andy.
Yeah, that's cool. That's good. Good recap. And I think Richard mentioned it, but it's worth emphasizing. This opening up of this code base is opening up of millions of dollars worth of effort, which is why we're excited about it. It's a big move, but again, the intention is really to allow the industry to expand with as few inhibitions and barriers as possible. Cool. Let's come on to the next one then. So Richard, coming your way with this one, what are the options that you evaluated before selecting this business source license? So you talked through some of them, but maybe just expand a bit on some of the pros and cons there.
Yeah, we looked at a lot of, when we made that list of goals for licenses, for licensing, we then looked at what are other businesses doing, what models have worked for them, and then what is best for an SSI ecosystem. And it's nice working at Evernym because we already have this tradition of, let's just give it all to the upstream open source. Let's make it all Apache licensed. But we're really, it's hard to fund the kind of innovation that SSI requires. We need a sustainable business to do that, and we felt like working just with Apache license code in a consortium, it wasn't going to work for us. We also looked at Apache license code outside the consortium, where we'd have more control to focus on our customer needs, but that was a challenge. We looked a lot at open core, but the challenge with SSI is that which features would you say aren't required by the user to meet their identity solutions, and finding that line and saying this is going to be Evernym only proprietary, and this is going to be part of the open source ecosystem. It's a very hard line to define. It's hard to communicate. We went back and forth on different ways to draw that line, and we really like.
Could you just expand on the open core thing a bit more, because it does sort of stop certain things being available, doesn't it? Which could allow for sort of hiding stuff, possibly, which is one reason why not to choose it. Is that right?
Yeah. So if you look at Mongo or MariaDB or some of these other open core businesses, Elastic, they've got a set of features that are completely open source. You can examine, you can play with, and then they have a set of features that are completely proprietary. You can't touch, and you can never touch. They'll always be proprietary. And whether you draw that line on scalability, or where you draw that line on niche use cases, or some of them draw the line on GUIs versus programmatic interfaces, wherever you draw that line in an SSI ecosystem, is like, oh, I can't have a GUI? That's kind of weird. Or, I can only talk to so many people. Where do you draw scalability with self-sovereign identity? It's a really hard line to draw. It can work in certain businesses, but we felt like for open source, for SSI, if the code is available, so people get that benefit of being able to inspect from the beginning, and if they know, the adoption period is going to take a year to get something in production, a year and a half. A year and a half later, it's completely open. That's the right time-based. That time-based limit is the right way to give those benefits immediately, but also to postpone when people can go just with the Apache license to do everything, so that we have room to grow our business. The one other option we looked at was the AGPL. I didn't talk about that in the presentation, but it's a very restrictive open source license, share alike license, that says that anybody who accesses this over the network, you have to share the benefits to them. And that can be really good for a dual license model, where you say, hey, it's all completely open source, but it might not work for your business. You should buy a commercial license from us. But when we survey customers, nobody understands the AGPL. It's just a very confusing license. We felt like if we just go business source and say, there's 2 restrictions, besides that, you can do what you want, and after 3 years, it's completely unrestricted, that's a very simple way to explain what we're trying to get done.
And just to add to that,
and I think,
we wanted
yeah, go on, James.
I was just saying, that the key was we wanted it to be useful for everybody, right? We didn't want to be cutting features out or like really kneecapping the use cases, right? Like there's still, we're very lucky. We've got about a couple hundred customers using this stuff, but there's still only a handful of scaling production use cases out there, and so for this stage of the industry, we're about really amplifying that, and so it would really be counter our mission and our objectives to actually prevent that. And so, we think that this license gives us, in some ways, the best of both worlds, in that we're enabling people to be really productive in those crucial early stages, and then they have a choice to make as to whether they want to engage commercially, or actually whether they, if enough time has passed, they can continue working with what they've got.
Cool, thank you. Okay, so let's. I'm conscious we're close to the end. We've got this promised fantastic green room experience coming up, where actually we'll cover a broader range of topics. Actually, if you've got anything on SSI, we'll cover it in the green room. And on that point, let's just do one more question before we move to that. So David asked about people dying, which It's kind of cheering us up a lot, David. But then you followed up. If we can cover that one in the green room, if you want to drop in to that after this session. But you asked a really pertinent follow-up, David, which is how would we incorporate using Evernym as part of a patent, or would it be out of the bounds of this licensing approach? So if they, I'm guessing that if David is creating some new feature or capability and wanting to patent it, or should I say patent, probably, Richard, how does that work? So Richard, do you want to handle that one?
Yeah, and there's two separate parts of that question. One that we get quite a bit is how does Evernym patent stuff if we promise to open source everything? And the answer is we got to file the patent and then we can open source. So it doesn't change anything. We just the patent license is part of the open source license. So if you see us announce the great patents we have, which we will have, that shouldn't worry you about the open source licensing, because the Apache license does say there's a patent grant in that. The second is if you're consuming an Evernym product and is part of a patentable invention, and that's fine. That works just fine. Our agreement doesn't prohibit you from doing that. And the fact that you're using publicly available source code or a commercial product to achieve your patentable invention doesn't change the patent nature of that. Of course, you got to get your own legal advice on exactly how to file that kind of patent, but there's nothing inherent in the code being available that prevents you from doing that.
That's a great answer. Thanks very much, Richard. Okay, so let's give this green room thing a try, shall we? Richard, you just want to share your screen and pop the link up, and Alex, could you drop it in the chat for people as well? So what we'll do is thanks, Alex. We'll finish off this sort of more formal webinar piece now, and then we'll move into the green room for you to ask all of those questions that you've been dying to ask about SSI.